ASCA, as I mentioned, it did come out of the recovery movement, and so while there's some elements of 12-step, what's different, for example, is there's a telephone support list, and members can put their names down, take other people's names down, and continue the support outside of the meeting. It's not a sponsor system like some meetings are. We actually ask that the survivors take the initiative to call somebody for support. So as Jen mentioned, when somebody's trying to deal with drinking as a form of regulation, when they're about to drink, they can call somebody on the support list, talk about why it is that they want to drink, and what feelings are coming up that they're trying to avoid, and to start building new regulation strategies and using the support of other survivors to learn those new healthy coping mechanisms. So to talk a little bit about how ASCA applies to trafficking survivors, I want to emphasize that it is designed for adults, and we haven't tried to use this model with children. If it is used with children, those children need to be safe and no longer dependent on their abusers. But mainly, we have designed it for adults because if there is a child being abused, we do not have any recourse to help that person. And then even for adults, when adults come to the meeting, there's a Survivor to Thriver manual that we'll show you in a second. The first step is achieving safety. So we don't ask that survivors dive into the trauma if they're currently unsafe and abused. If they're currently being victimized, they do need their psychological defenses to get through. And by challenging those, that can really put somebody in an emotionally dangerous place. So when people come to ASCA, we do have them go look at the Survivor to Thriver manual and make sure that they have established safety first. Also, as I mentioned earlier, when thinking about starting a support group, survivors, which we recommend, think about whether it's important for a therapist or a social worker or somebody else to coordinate the meeting, at least until survivors have a feel for it and then can step in. Now, this is mainly because it takes a lot of work to start a meeting, finding a room, building materials, getting trained, also being able to emotionally hold yourself while other people share stories. The co-facilitators do need a level of maturity where they do listen to everybody and they're able to intervene if somebody breaks a guideline, starts talking about inappropriate material. And so it does take a survivor who has the capacity to lead a meeting. So that would be one reason why for a therapist or social worker to lead it. And that therapist does not share their own experience because the meeting is really for survivors of child abuse. Even if that therapist identifies the power dynamic that can be set up is not healthy for the meeting. So then survivor-led meetings are great because the survivors then learn leadership skills. They also learn higher level emotion regulation because while they may be having their own feelings, they learn how to hold those in order to facilitate the meeting. And that's also a way for survivors to see themselves as leaders in their own recovery. So when a survivor walks in the meeting and we say that, hey, any of you can lead this meeting, that really challenges their self-concept of there's something wrong with me. And we also encourage survivors to take charge of their own healing by reading literature and understanding the framework of ASCA. So the materials that we provide, we really share the readings and the theories behind it because as a survivor myself, I was lied to a lot, and I also want to seek quick fixes that might not be in my best interest. So we don't want survivors to take our perspective blindly, but to understand where we're coming from, know its limitations, know what works, and to decide for themselves if this is what works for them, to understand why we think that processing memories instead of avoiding them is useful, so that we're not just blindly telling them to believe us, but that they can research it on their own. And then I would say when you're thinking about survivors, starting a survivor support group, I would make sure to complement ASCA with providing intense psychotherapy, whether that's referring survivors somewhere or having it in-house. ASCA really brings up a lot of trauma, and a once-a-week meeting is not enough to deal with those issues. As soon as you open up those memories, it's Pandora's box, and folks really need ongoing support, especially for severe ongoing abuse. And, you know, our culture these days, it's not about long-term therapy, it's about quick fixes. So really providing a space where survivors can get long-term support. And then this last point is a little bit more complicated. For survivors who are adults and experience adult victimization, it's really important for them to piece together and sort out whether their experiences are from the adult victimization or from a childhood experience. And it may be from both. So for me, for example, I was mainly abused up until the age of 20, but sometimes as I remember being raped at the brothel, I'm also remembering a time when my father was raping me, and it is hard to sort out. Now, for adult survivors who were raped as adults, so for example, Jen was abused up until she was 23, they often will feel intense responsibility. You know, I was an adult, I should have been able to get out. But really to understand, well, yes, you were 23, but you had been abused the whole time up until that point, so how could you magically at 23 feel any agency? So I think that's really important for survivors as they process adult trauma. And then also lastly, there may be different forms of trauma in childhood that affect processing adult trauma. For example, not being able to share their feelings as a kid, being neglected, not being talked to or talking about their own life. Those, you know, seemingly small traumas affect a survivor's capacity to talk at a meeting. So if they were never listened to or talked to as a kid and then on through their adult life, how can we expect a survivor to show up and just talk about their lives? We have had survivors show up at meetings and are quiet for weeks until they finally feel ready, and that's totally okay. In ASCA, we allow that. And so really separating out, is this a remnant of childhood trauma or is this something about the present? And then